In this lecture, we're going to talk about how to install software applications on Linux. In Windows, you would usually go to a download page of the application and download the installer, which will take you through the installation steps using some installation wizard, and that's how you usually install an application. In Linux, you could do the same, but it's absolutely not a recommended way of doing it. Instead, on Linux, we install most of the software using a package manager tool. There are exceptions, and we will see them, but probably 90% of software you're gonna install will be available through your package manager, and that's how you will install them. So to understand how installing applications on Linux using a package manager works, let's first understand what is a package manager and what is a software package. A software package is a compressed archive that contains all the files that are required by a specific software to run. But software applications usually have dependencies, so they depend on other software to run. For example, if you want to install and run Firefox, Firefox actually needs lots of different other software to run properly, which are not directly packaged in the Firefox package. So you need to install all those dependencies in order to be able to run Firefox. Also, we learned that installing software on Linux is more complicated because the files are going to be spread across different folders. Not like Windows, where everything for one application, all the files basically goes into one folder in program files. So on Windows, you can simply remove that program folder and all its configuration files and everything will be gone. Well, in Linux, you can do that. So you can just remove the program by deleting the files because you don't know where all the program files are located because they have been just spread across multiple folders. So that's why we need a package manager to install that software package on your Linux system. So the package manager will actually resolve the dependencies for you. Again, with the example of Firefox, first it will find and fetch Firefox package, and it will see when installing Firefox that maybe it needs 100 other packages, and it will go and find those 100 software packages and install them as well. If these 100 packages have their own dependencies, it will install them too. Super convenient for you as a Linux user because you don't have to manage and resolve those dependencies yourself. In addition to that, Package Manager will know where to put different files from the packages, where to put the binary files for the application, shared files, libraries, dependencies, etc. So when you uninstall the software using Package Manager again, it will clean up everything because it knows where it put stuff, so it will just delete them from all those places. Now let's say you have an old version of a software and you want to update it. Using a package manager, in this case, is also great because you don't have to uninstall the old version of the software and install a new one. Like on Windows, for example, you can just use a command of the package manager to update the software. So it will do all that's needed in the background automatically. Great. Now, you're probably thinking, where do you get that package manager, or what does it actually look like? Well, in every Linux distribution, you have a package manager already bundled in. So when you install the operating system like Ubuntu, you have a package manager already available. In Ubuntu's system, which we're using, we have a package manager called apt, APT, which stands for Advanced Package Tool. And this is a very popular package manager that you will see in many other distributions as well. And apt package manager has commands you can use to install, uninstall, or upgrade the applications on your system. So now that we know why a package manager is useful in Linux and that we have a package manager called apt available, let's see how it actually works. So first of all, we use the package manager in our command line interface. So if I type apt here, apt, you see that we have apt command available. And here you see all the actions that you can execute using the apt command. So first of all, a very convenient way to look up a package using your package manager tool is apt search and the name of the package. In this example, we're gonna install Java on our Ubuntu system so that we can use it later in the bootcamp. And this is gonna be an OpenJDK, Java Development Kit. That's what we want to install. And the search will basically show us all the versions and all the available packages we can install using the package manager tool. However, we will have to execute this using a sudo command and execute. And there you go. Here we see the packages for OpenJDK and different versions here. What you could also do, and this is actually very convenient in Ubuntu systems, is if you type in a command that belongs to the package that you want to install and execute, you will see a list of suggestions or suggested packages that you can install that basically has this command. And we're gonna grab one of them. I'm actually gonna grab Java version or OpenJDK version 11, copy with Shift-Control-C, and then paste in with Shift-Control-V, and let's execute this. So we have apt install name, the exact name of the package that we want to install, and again with sudo. And this command basically makes a lookup of the package and the dependencies, and it shows you what will be installed. And then you can basically confirm that we're okay with the results and we want to install that. Awesome. So now if I do Java again, you see that the command is already available. And let's do Java version, and OpenJDK version 11 was installed. So that's how easy it is to install different software using a package manager tool. And we can also uninstall a software using apt remove command and the name of the package. Again, it will ask for confirmation for what will be removed. And now Java command is not available anymore. So the big advantage of a package manager is that you have one central place from which you query, install, update, or uninstall, or remove your applications. So your package manager knows and keeps track of the state of each installed software for you. In the same way, you can install Docker, Docker Compose, NPM or Node, and any other tools that we will use in this bootcamp. Now there is another package manager called apt-get that you will often come across in articles or installation guides, etc. And as its name is very close to apt or apt, it may be confusing because you may wonder what is the difference between the two, or maybe you can use them interchangeably. And if I do apt-get here, you see that we have apt-get also available on our Ubuntu system. And it has a different set of commands. However, the same way you can also use it to install, update, and uninstall applications. So what is the difference between apt and apt-get? Well, apt is actually more user-friendly than apt-get. So when you install an application or when you query an application, it gives you a much user-friendlier or much cleaner output than apt-get. And the apt search command that we use to look up a package, that search command or query command is not available in apt-get. So that means that if you have both available, you should be using apt because it's user-friendlier, and it is actually available out of the box, as I said, bundled with the distribution in more recent Linux distributions. And to see the difference between apt and apt-get when installing Java, for example, in terms of user-friendly output, let's actually install Java using apt-get. So apt-get install, name of the package, and again sudo. So as you see, this is the same exact command, just with apt-get instead of apt. And if I execute this, you have more specific output, plus you don't have this progress bar at the end that you have with Java. So that's basically the main difference between apt and apt-get package managers in a nutshell. Great, so we've seen how to use apt package manager to install packages. But where do those packages actually come from? Where does the package manager find the software we want to install, and where does it find all its dependencies that it also installs? And these packages are files, right? So they need to be stored somewhere. Linux uses repositories, which are like warehouses of hundreds or thousands of software packages. So each distribution, like Ubuntu, for example, will have repositories that has most of the software that you'll need. And that's where the package manager gets these software packages from. These repositories can be local, but mostly they're hosted online. So the package manager can access them over the internet, and usually on a fresh new operating system that we just installed. Before you start installing packages on your system, the first command that you should execute is actually apt update. And this command, what it actually does is it refreshes the state of the repositories that the distribution is using to get the latest versions of the applications, to update the cache, etc. And this will usually also give you a summary of all the packages that have newer versions in the repositories that you can actually upgrade. Now, there are a couple of official repositories that a distribution and the package manager will use. And these repositories are actually stored for apt package manager inside /etc, which, if you remember, is a folder that holds the system configuration files as well as configurations for different applications that you have on the system. And we have a folder for apt, and if we list the contents inside, we have sources.list file. And since everything is file in Linux, we can just print the contents like this. So this is a file that contains all the repositories that your apt package manager will use to find the packages and to fetch them from. And as I said, these repositories are available online, so you have the URLs of those repositories. And that's how we installed Java, and that's how you can install Docker, Docker Compose, NPM, and other tools from those official repositories. And this will be mostly the way you install packages on your Linux system. However, there are exceptions when you can't install a certain software like this using apt command from those official repositories. Why? Because sometimes you may need a package that is not in these default official repositories that your package manager uses, or maybe the package is there, but it's an older version of that software and you need the latest one. And this often happens because Ubuntu, like other distributions, have a procedure to verify and approve a software package and every new version of that package before including it into the official repositories. And this verification and approval process may take days or weeks. And if you don't want to wait for that, or if you need the latest version of some software for your project, then you can't install it from there. It could also be that Ubuntu just doesn't include a certain software packages in its official repositories at all. Examples for that could be some browsers or maybe code editors like Visual Studio Code or IntelliJ. So what is the alternative here if you can't install a software like this? Well, for this type of cases, you have actually multiple alternatives, and we're going to see some of them here. Let's say you want to install an IntelliJ program on your Ubuntu operating system because maybe you're going to be writing some program and you need a code editor or integrated development environment for that. So one very easy way to install applications that are not available in the official repo is using Ubuntu software application. If I click on it and open, first of all, you have a tab that shows you all the installed software that you can also remove using this view. And in Explore, you can search for new packages. In our example, we're looking for an IntelliJ editor. And if I type that in, you'll see IntelliJ Community, the paid one, etc. So you have all these options here. And if I click on the community, the free version that we're going to use, you have this super convenient install button. And if I click on this, again, we're installing a software, so you need authentication so that not everyone can do that. And this will just start installing the application locally. And here you see the version that you're installing, so you can actually choose between different ones. So now we have IntelliJ installed locally, and the same way you can remove it from here. And if you wanted to access your installed software now, let's close this. And in the applications or show applications, if we type in IntelliJ, here is our application. So that's one alternative for installing different applications. Another one is using another package manager tool, which is actually a newer package manager for Linux, which is called Snap. And Snap is basically a software packaging and deployment system for operating systems that use Linux kernels. And if I type in Snap here in my Ubuntu operating system, you see that we have Snap also available by default. So this one also comes bundled with the operating system distribution. And with Snap, we can also install, remove software, and execute some other commands. And you will actually see installation guide for different applications like IntelliJ as well, or Visual Studio Code, which is another code editor. You will see the installation guides for these tools with Snap command. So what makes Snap different from installing applications using apt is that it uses these self-contained packages. So basically, package where all the dependencies are already packaged inside, and everything that you need to run that application is basically in one full package. So all these files that application needs is in one compressed file, and the format of that file is also called Snap. And here you can see one of the examples from Visual Studio Code, which again is another editor. You see an example with Snap, or installing it with Snap. And you can also use Snap to install IntelliJ, for example. So let's execute the Snap command to install Visual Studio Code now. So sudo snap install code. So this is the name of Visual Studio Code, Snap package. And if I execute and enter my password, this will install Visual Studio Code. And the same way to validate that, there you go, we see Visual Studio Code icon here in our applications. And for some applications, you may have both Snap and apt commands available to install them. For example, if I do Docker, you see that you can install them either using Snap or apt. Now, obviously, the question is what is the difference and which one you should use. So the main difference between these two tools is that the Snap packages are, as I mentioned, self-contained. Everything is packaged inside dependencies, and everything that the application needs is in a Snap package, and it will be installed as one unified application. apt, however, has this split of different files, right? The binaries and libraries, as we saw previously in the file system lecture, everything will be distributed and stored separately. So that's the main difference. And that's how usually the applications should be installed on Linux. So when you have this alternative, you should always go with apt package manager and use that instead. But to mention some of Snap's advantages, it supports universal Linux packages. So it's not specific to a distribution and you can use it across different Linux distributions. So that's an advantage. And also it refreshes and updates the applications that it manages automatically. On the downside, however, because everything is packaged inside this one package for each application, of course the Snap files are much bigger, so they need much more space to download and install. And that means if you install 50 applications that share the dependencies, these dependencies will be downloaded multiple times for each application because each one comes bundled with its own dependency. Whereas with apt, this will be managed better. So if applications share the dependencies, apt will download this dependency once and it will know when installing the next tool that needs the dependencies, it will basically know that dependency is already there and it will not re-download that. So basically Snap doesn't use the storage resource as efficiently as apt, and it also doesn't install applications in a way which is common for Linux. So when you have these two options, you should always use apt package manager, and Snap is basically an alternative if you can't install a certain package using apt. And going back to the Ubuntu software application, from which we installed IntelliJ, we have a drop-down with different versions here that we can choose from. And if I click inside, you see that each version has a format Snap and it comes from a Snap store. So basically this is like a front end or user interface of Snap tool that we just used on a command line interface to install Visual Studio Code. So this under the hood uses the same Snap command that we used. And another way of installing applications that I want to show you is adding another repository to this official repositories list that Ubuntu has, or a Linux distribution like Ubuntu has, and then installing the package from there. And the reason why I want to show you that option as well is because you will encounter that option, for example, when installing relatively new applications or new tools that are not in the official repositories yet, especially if you're working on an older version of operating system. And in an installation guide, you will see these steps where you have to first add a repository that contains the package that you're looking for, and then basically install the package from there. So when you add the repository, it will be automatically added to the sources.list file, which is in the apt configuration folder under /etc/apt. And once the repository is on the list, there you can use apt package manager to install packages also from the repository. So now when you execute apt install command, it will search for that package in all the repositories that are configured on your system. And when it finds that package, it will basically just fetch it from there. And some of these repositories that you add to your system are personal package archive repositories, also called PPAs. So PPA is basically a repository that allows application developers or private users basically to create their own repository for Linux systems and then distribute the software through that repository. Again, if there is a tool that is super cutting edge and that is not in most of the official repositories, but they of course want to make it available to the users, they may create this personal repository and host that application there so you can download it and install it from there. Now note that PPAs, as the name suggests, personal package archive, these are personal repositories, so they're not verified by the Linux distribution that you're using. So you should be very selective when adding the PPAs to your system and verify yourself who this repository belongs to, who is maintaining it, etc. So these are some of the common ways of installing software on Linux, where the first option, which you should always use if possible, and this is actually what we use most of the time when installing software on Linux, which is the package manager like apt that fetches packages from the official package repositories. So that will be the first option for 80 to 90% of the cases. If that is not possible, then we have alternative, and the first alternative that you should use is Snap, of course, if it's available on your system. And using Snap, you can really easily download and install different software. And if none of them is an option, sometimes you may have to add additional repository to your system so that your package manager can fetch software packages from there. Great, now we saw how to install applications and software on Ubuntu operating system using apt package manager and some alternatives. But Ubuntu is just one of the Linux distributions, and there are hundreds of other distributions out there. Now, do they all use the same package manager like apt, or does each have their own, or how does it work with other distributions? Well, these hundreds of distributions can actually be grouped into categories if they are based on same source code. And these distributions in the same category will use the same package manager. There are two most used and known categories of Linux distributions, which are Debian-based distributions, such as Ubuntu, Debian, Linux Mint, which all use apt or apt-get. And the second one is Red Hat-based distributions, such as RHEL or RHEL, which stands for Red Hat Enterprise Linux. We also have CentOS, which is also Red Hat-based, or Fedora. You have other distributions as well in the same categories, but these are some of the most known ones and most commonly used ones. And a Red Hat-based distributions actually use a different package manager called Yum. And throughout the bootcamp, we will be working with different remote servers where we will use both apt and Yum package managers. So you'll see examples of both in our later projects as well. And even though these are two different package managers on two different categories of distributions, the concept is very similar. So you have this package manager that uses the official repositories that are configured for the system, like CentOS or Fedora or RHEL, and basically fetching packages from there and installing them on the system by resolving all the dependencies. However, there could be differences in the repositories that the distributions are using, such as some repositories will have more packages available than others, some will have newer versions of applications than others, etc. So the package manager tool and the repositories that different distributions are using, or different categories of Linux distributions are using, is usually one of the main differentiators when deciding which distribution to choose. So system administrators, for example, who configure the servers may decide which Linux distribution they install based on the package manager tool they prefer. However, within the same category, the difference between the distributions is essentially very small. Mostly it's the desktop environment and visuals, which you can also change and adjust. So now you know what package managers are, and you know how to install applications in Linux distributions. And we saw some examples on Ubuntu. We have one main way of installing software on Linux and some alternatives for the rest of the cases. And we also saw that distributions are actually categorized based on which package manager tool they use.